Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Define Disaster. This is Battlefield 4. Today we're going to be trying to figure out which weaponry is best suited for Team Deathmatch in Battlefield by looking at a number of different guns in a little more detail, as well as discussing the concept of time to kill. Now, before we get started, I would like to thank Bombatron, one of my subscribers, for providing the initial kind of topic suggestion for the video. He was the one who asked me if I could make a video on TDM weapons based on time to kill, with a special emphasis on kind of finding weaponry that maybe wasn't most frequently used but was very suitable for Team Deathmatch. The way he put it was he did not want to be a sheep and use the AEK and FAMAS like everybody else. I understand that. I like weapon diversity as well. I like to use a different weapon from time to time in Team Deathmatch. It doesn't always have to be the same 2 or 3. So thank you very much for providing this topic, and I hope this video answers your question. Now, with all that being said, let's get into what time to kill actually mean. Now, the definition of it for Battlefield 4 is pretty obvious. It's basically the amount of time you are going to take to kill your enemy with said gun. The problem with the official time to kill statistics, though, is that they take into account very little factors that will actually affect the performance of your gun. So the time to kill data that you get from websites like Synthic only takes into account the fire rate of your gun, so how fast you're shooting, the bullet velocity, which means how fast your bullet is going to reach your target, and the damage model of the gun, basically how much damage you are doing at a given distance. Now, the problem with this is that an AEK then beats out a SAR-21 at 100 meters. We all know the AEK is absolutely unusable at those distances, where the SAR-21 actually excels at combat at longer distances. Now, if you want to take into the other factors that you need to take into account to kind of get a realistic time to kill, you start having a huge amount of variables. One of those, for example, is accuracy of the gun. So while you have an LMG may not have the same accuracy as an assault rifle or a Pdw. So you have to take this into account when shooting at targets, especially at longer ranges. Another very important factor is the recoil of your gun. As we were saying earlier, the AEK doesn't beat out the SAR-21 at 100 meters simply because the recoil makes actually hitting the target extremely difficult, where the SAR-21's very low recoil actually helps make this easier. And last but not least, and this is especially for TDM, the most important factor, the state your character model is in when you're shooting the gun. Are you standing still and aiming down sight? Are you hip firing, moving, jumping, prone, crouched? All this affects the accuracy of your gun and affects different guns differently. So for example, an LMG, hip firing is obviously never going to work very well, whereas a PDW is excellent for hip firing. Now, of course, you're always going to be more accurate when aiming down sight, but hip firing is something that you want to use in close quarter in TDM very often. It has a number of benefits, but we're not going to get into that now. So the discussion on time to kill and how it should be defined is very complex, and I actually wanted to measure time to kill myself, considering all the realistic factors on something like the test range. The only problem with this, however, is that the hit markers in Battlefield 4 on these kind of dummy targets are actually not reliable enough to, when slowing down the footage, actually kind of come with some kind of time measurement value for how long it actually takes to down your target. So I'm sadly gonna have to say I wasn't actually able to do that, but nevertheless, we're gonna go over some guns today that you may know, may not know, are actually useful for TDM and what situations they are good at. So this is not really kind of a weapon showdown. There's not going to be a bunch of stats thrown out, but we're going to just go over a number of guns I would recommend you to use in TDM and a number of guns you may not know are actually useful for Team Deathmatch. Now, having explained what time to kill means and kind of what the problem with using standardized time to kill data from, Synthic or other sources of data for Battlefield 4, let's get into what guns I can kind of, I guess you could say, recommend, and be this kind of mainstream or guns you may have not tried out for Team Deathmatch. Now, of course, Team Deathmatch is mostly close quarter. You're gonna rarely find engagements over a distance that is larger than 50 meters. So obviously, for the medic class, things like the AEK, the FAMAS, and the F2000 are obviously going to be good guns. No questions asked there. Everybody uses them. If you're looking for something with slightly more range capability, of course, you've got the M416, the ACE-23. I did a video on which one of those two I feel is better and why. Feel free to actually find that in the description below. But what guns can I recommend that kind of you don't see in TDM every day? Well, basically, those would be the high damage model weapons. Things like the Bulldog or the Scar H. Now the Scar H is a fantastic all-rounder weapon if you can get hold and control of that recoil, and it actually has a very fast time to kill thanks to its 4-bullet kill, which means it's not as good as an AEK or a FAMAS, but it's certainly good enough to compete very well in close quarter. The Bulldog, on the other hand, is actually better than the AEK when it comes to time to kill. It's got a hefty reload, slightly more or slightly worse than the AEK, but it's definitely manageable. And if you're looking for a gun that really is close quarter exclusive, then try out the Bulldog. It's definitely worth your time. It is a good gun, definitely. Now, of course, the preference for TDM is going to be medic class because you simply have that healing ability. If you're looking for a challenge, however, and don't desperately need to take the medic class, you feel confident enough to use something like an engineer support, let's move on to what other guns you can use. Now, engineers have access to the PDWs, and the PDWs are, for TDM, in my opinion, actually the best guns in the game. They're basically meant for engagements under 50 meters. That's basically what their damage model points to, and they all generally have rather high fire rates, etc, etc. The only problem is you don't have a med pack. So basically, try out a number of PDWs. I mean, the MX4 is a kind of good middle ground if you're looking for something that's going to perform well at 30 meters as well. If you're looking for something very close quarter, try out the CZ3A1. It's basically a FAMAS just with 30 rounds in the magazine, or 30 plus 1 instead of the 25 plus 1, 26 that the FAMAS has. The AS-VAL technically is the best gun for close quarter combat in the game. It's got a higher damage model for, I believe, up to 8 meters. So you actually will 4-shot kill somebody with a weapon that has a fire rate of 900 rounds per minute up to 8 meters and out. So definitely worth trying out the AS-VAL. As you've seen from the gameplay today, I have a blast. I love using the AS-VAL. Obviously, it's got a number of hindrances to it because it's got a smaller magazine, and obviously this fantastic damage model of the from AS-VAL isn't as like the Bulldog good to 30, 40, 50 meters. It only actually lasts for 8, 9 meters, and then you're looking at a standard 900 rounds per minute 5-shot kill, which isn't bad either, but you should consider you've only got 20 plus 1 bullets to spend. Another good gun is the MP7, 950 rounds per minute, excuse me. Good solid performance, 5-shot kill. I like it very much. It's got quite a bit of recoil, so make sure you can control that recoil. Otherwise, you may actually have some difficulties there. Otherwise, I mean, the PDWs generally are good. I wouldn't use something like a PP2000. That's just more long range. But P90 is another good gun you can use if you love hip firing. Basically, the great thing about the PDWs is their hip firing ability besides their high fire rates. In close quarter, I prefer to hip fire a target down because it kind of, I have a better kind of oversight of my entire environment, versus when I'm aiming down sight, I'm slightly more focused on one alley and one direction. That's my personal preference, my personal play style. You may play differently, but yes, PDWs, try them out. Problem, of course, is you don't have a med pack. You're going to have to kind of deal with that, if you will. Most PDWs are good for TDM, and you have a rocket launcher as well. Moving on to carbines, you can use these with any class. So you can also use these with a medic if you are so inclined. And there's also a number of good weapons here for TDM. Of course, as everybody knows, ACW-R, MTAR, great. The Groza 1 is fantastic for close quarter exclusive. It's got that higher damage model, and that I believe out to something like 30 meters. It's got 31 bullets as well, and a fire rate of 725 rounds per minute. So it's absolutely nuts if you're going for close quarter exclusive, but it does have quite a hefty recoil. So if you're looking to shoot somebody at, say, 40 meters, you're going to be in a tight spot and probably going to lose that firefight to somebody using something like a M416. Now, other than those 2 or 3 kind of guns that pretty much everybody knows, you can also try the A91. It only has a fire rate of 800, but I personally find it to be extremely capable at all engagement distance other than long distance, and given that we're talking about TDM, that's not really an issue. The SG553 is also not bad, definitely worth your consideration, but definitely a great gun to try out is the ACE-52 CQB. Now this gun has one of those kind of fabled higher damage models at a rate of 650 rounds per minute. It's not as good as an AEK. It's not perfect close quarter material, but it does good damage, and it's also decent at longer ranges. The ACE-22 CQB is its kind of partner in crime, although it does, this is more of a kind of all-rounder weapon. It doesn't have that higher damage model, but therefore has a higher fire rate. Now, last but not least, we have the LMGs. Now, the LMGs have a number of guns that technically should be good for close quarter. You've got the MG4, you've got the AWS, both sporting 800 rounds per minute of a fire rate, which seems good enough for close quarter. My only problem with these guns are, and with LMGs in general, you have to stand still when firing them. That may be all and well possible on rush at longer engagement distance, but we're talking about TDM here, where a lot of gameplay is kind of running about, moving about, jumping, hip firing a lot, and LMGs are just horrible at that. And you don't have health to compensate for this either. You've only got ammunition. With the kind of medic class, you've got health, obviously. With the engineer, you've got a rocket launcher, which can be used at longer ranges. With the sniper class, or recon, at least you have like motion balls. You've always got an advantage with each class, with the exception of the support player. For TDM, I wouldn't recommend actually picking him up. But if you want to have a challenge, sure, feel free. MG4, AWS, M249, all have decent fire rates. PKP got a decent, not such a decent fire rate, but it's a higher damage model weapon once more, so you're going to 4-shot kill your enemies. The M240B is another example of that, although personally I don't find much pleasure in playing that gun. Lastly, the RPK, another higher damage model weapon. I love the RPK, but again, not really for TDM, more of a rush weapon in my opinion. So let's try to sum this discussion up. There's a number of fantastic guns out there that can be used in TDM. The problem basically is, so in TDM, you need to have a med pack. I rarely play TDM not as medic because you get hurt, you have to find a med pack or wait for the slow heal, which often you're just going to get killed in the meantime. And in most TDM matches, we're not talking about 64 players here, 32 players, med packs can be hard to find. If you're fighting with a partner in crime, you've got a teammate that's or somebody on comms that you're working with who's a medic, the situation may slightly change, but otherwise I would recommend stick to the medic class. Or if you're really looking for a challenge, try out the engineer class, simply because those guns are really, they kind of to a certain extent make up for the lack of med pack in TDM. I love playing the AS-VAL. It's my personal favorite gun as engineer for TDM, and probably the FAMAS would be it if I'm playing medic. And from the Carbines, I would actually recommend the Groza 1. You should really try that gun out. It's hard to control, but it can be a hell of a lot of fun. It's just got a crazy time to kill, and for close quarter combat, it's pretty decent. So these are kind of my thoughts on TDM, what weapons to pick, which weapons are good, which weapons are not. My philosophy on the LMGs, for me, those are really, they're a rush class and class of guns. They're not meant for TDM. I know there's players out there who like to play an MG4 or an AWS for TDM, and if you can pull it off, feel free. It's just not my personal playstyle. I don't do very well. So feel free to leave your thoughts on the issue down below. Feel free to leave thoughts on certain guns, your playstyle, how does it compare to mine? Do you agree with what I've said, or do you actually disagree? Feel free to explain that to me. If any of the guns we've talked about today interest you in a little bit more detail, feel free to check out my channel to see if I've actually covered them yet, or feel free to request a video on those down below in the comments. As this video, I usually take suggestions and requests from my viewers, because of course it's all about making those videos that you guys want to see. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next Battlefield 4 video.